Toby nodded. Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby? Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap, and in the surrounding area, he heard a faint ringing sound, his eyes widening, and he froze in place. Toby? The counselor asked. Toby, are you listening? Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again and slowly looked over at the little window through the door, where he saw it, a dark, featureless figure peering in at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing glowing louder and louder until suddenly the loud sound of the counselor broke his trance. Toby! She yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and backed up into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched. That night, Toby lay in bed. His eyes were dazed as he stared up straight at the ceiling. He could feel himself beginning to doze off when he heard the scattering of footsteps down his hallway. He sat up and looked towards his doorway, his door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving a cold lightning. He stood up and slowly made his way toward the doorway when suddenly the door, which was previously wide open, slammed in front of his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath when he hit the ground, and he began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back on his feet. He reached out and grasped a cold door handle with his bandaged hand, and it creaked open. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up the darkness with the blue moonlight. As he padded his way down, he could hear footsteps rustling around him, and a faint giggling followed by which a pitter-patter of small feet, which sounded like a child had ran in front of him, giggling and running around. The hallway was a lot longer than he remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital. He heard the door creak in front of him. Mom? He called out in a shaky voice. Suddenly, the door slammed behind him, and he jumped and turned around. Behind him, he heard a long, eerie groan that sounded like a croak, right in front of his ear. He turned around as fast as he could and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. Her eyes were clouded white, her skin pale, and the right side of her jaw dangling there by a tissue muscle, glass producing from her forehead, and black blood leaking down her face, her blonde hair pulled up in a ponytail as it always was, and she was wearing her gray t-shirt and athlete shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways they shouldn't be. She stood, emitting a long, croaking noise which inched away from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. Ah! He crawled back, started to crawl away from his sister, but he was able to break an eye contact, and he held her with the bright-dead eyes. He dragged himself backwards until he backed up into something. He stood up for a second. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark feature, and the same figure that stood over him now. Behind the tall, dark mask were rows of children looking ranged from 3 to 10 years old, their eyes completely black and the dark hair blackly from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by dark tentacles that wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight on his stomach and got the wind knocked out of him. He tried to make a scream, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it all went black.